Okay, so we are going to be talking about day 5 homework. So if you could answer the first several problems for the Edpuzzle. Okay, so number 1, we're talking about the domain, the range, the horizontal asymptote. So there's the domain. Again, the horizontal asymptote is going to be the constant. Since there isn't a constant, it's 0. The fact that this is a positive means that the graph is above the horizontal asymptote, which would make the range 0 to infinity. And then it goes into this question, is the graph of the function above or below the horizontal asymptote? I just explained that. What are the domain and range and the equation of the vertical asymptote of the inverse? Okay, so we should know that now. The domain and the range are switched, as well as the horizontal asymptote becomes the vertical asymptote. And then is the graph of the inverse left or right of the vertical asymptote, and then y. All right, well, since the original function was above, then the inverse is going to end up being to the right. Okay. Number 2, see if you can answer all of those questions. Okay, so here we go. Here's our domain and range. And again, our horizontal asymptote is that -1. The fact that this is negative shows that it's below. So that's going to be negative infinity all the way up to -1. Since a is negative or less than 0, the graph is below y equals -1. Okay, now we're switching, right? This column is about the domain and range of the inverse, right? So if the horizontal is y equals -1, the vertical is x equals -1. Since this is below, the inverse is going to be to the left. Okay. All right, number 3, answer those questions. Okay. So one of the things I want you to start doing on number 3, especially now that we are moving into logarithms, is to get rid of that horizontal, get rid of that y-axis reflection. So this 1.25 is the same as 5/4. So it's like saying 5/4 to the -x plus 2, which means with that -x, if I were to rewrite it, I would rewrite h of x, which I recommend that you rewrite all of your exponentials so that they have a positive x value. So that means it's going to be 4/5 to, well, before I do that, let's factor out a -1, right? So 5/4, -1, and then I would have x minus 2. And then plus 3. And what I want to do is take that -1 and apply it here. So that means my h of x becomes 4/5. Okay, so I'm getting rid of that -1 exponent by flipping it to the x minus 2 plus 3. All right, so now what we want to do is we're looking at this, and I just want you to get very familiar and more comfortable with rewriting with no y-axis reflection. So I always want you to be able to rewrite this with a positive x. All right, so our domain is always going to be all real numbers. Our range, this is positive, and this is our 3, so it's going to be from 3 to infinity. All right, and again, since the a value was positive, we are above. Switching gives us the inverse. And then because we were above, we are now going to be to the right. Okay. All right, so look at number 4. I want you to practice rewriting this without this -x. And then answer the questions. Okay, so f of x, the first thing we're going to do is write 3/2. We're going to factor out a -1 that gives me x plus 1 and then plus 2. Take care of this. So f of x is equal to 2/3 and x plus 1 and then plus 2. All right, so this is decay. All right, so what we're going to do is going to go ahead and do domain and range in horizontal asymptote. Remember, that's a plus, so we're going from the horizontal asymptote above. Since A is possible, we are above. Switching it because it's the inverse. Because we were above, we are now to the right. All right, so it says for each of the functions below, find the equation of the inverse, and we need to show our work. So answer 5. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is switch the x and the y. Now, again, the log or the base is 2, so we can take each side to log base 2, which is what it's doing, or you can go directly from here to here, which is log base 2 of x is equal to y minus 3. Then from here, again, we're solving for y, so we're going to add 3 and then replace y with f inverse. Number 6. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is switch the x and the y. We're going to subtract the 4, divide by 2. So one of the things when you divide by 2, it's like multiplying by a half. So think about that, and then that way we have 1/2 x minus 2. Now we are ready to put it in log form. So again, you can raise both sides with the ln or use, so if you do that, that's what you have. If you do the definition, you have ln, and you don't need to put the e, but it's ln to this is the argument is equal to y minus 2. If you do this method, it's fine. You just cancel that out, and you're left with here. Add 2 to both sides, replace y with g inverse. Number 7. Okay, so from here, we're going to replace x and y. I'm going to add 1. Okay, now what we're going to do is go ahead and raise both sides to that log 3, or again, log 3. The argument is x plus 1, and it equals negative y plus 3, which is exactly what you get after you do that step. Now we're going to subtract 3. Okay, so when I subtract 3, I get negative 3 plus log 3 of x plus 1, but it equals negative y. So I'm also going to multiply by or divide by negative 1, so it gives me negative 1 here and a negative 1 here, which is why I get negative log 3 of x plus 1 plus 3, and then replace y with h inverse. Okay, so for 8, 9, and 10, for each log, we are going to state the equation of the vertical asymptote and state the domain and range. Show your work. All right. So remember, when we have a log function, the equation of the vertical asymptote is going to be the argument equal to 0. So 8, go ahead and answer 8. So there's my argument equal to 0, and I'm solving. The domain is the same thing. It's going to be the argument, but this time it's going to be greater than 0. And then the range is always all real numbers. Okay, so number 9, try 9. Okay, again, I'm going to set that argument equal to 0 and solve. Set the argument greater than 0 and solve, and the range is all real numbers. Number 10. Okay, set the argument equal to 0 and solve. The domain is set the argument greater than 0 and solve, and then the range is all real numbers. All right, so we're considering this exponential function g of x and answering questions 11 through 15. So it says explain how the graph of g of x is different from its parent. So you are going to be talking about how the equations how the equation changes affect the graph. So let's start with this here, and then we'll talk about this one and then this one. So number 1, it's going to reflect over the x-axis. It's going to be shifted 3 units to the right, and then it's going to be shifted down 2. The graph Okay, the graph is going to be for every x value of this parent, we are going to be adding 3 because it's shifting right. And then we are multiplying the y by a -1, and then we are subtracting 2. So this is what we could use to represent how the graph is going to be different. We're taking every x, adding 3, and every y, multiplying by a negative and subtracting 2. Based on the transformations that we described in number 11, complete the table of values. So please do that. All right, so if you were to plug in -2 into number 11, or the equation, the rest of these problems, you would get those points. So these would be the coordinates. Once we did, remember this is f of x. F of x is 2 to the power of x, okay? So 2 to the -2 is 1/4. 2 to the -1 is 1/2, okay? That's f of x. Now, it does say what are the coordinates of g of x. So we're taking all of the x values and we are adding 3. So we're going to add 3, and that's how we're getting these. And then for every y value, we're multiplying it by a negative and then subtracting 2. Multiplying it by a negative, subtracting 2. Okay? So that's what we're doing with g of x. Now look at this one, the inverse. Okay? Well, the inverse is just switching the x and the y, so that's exactly what I'm doing on that last table. Number 13, find the equation of the inverse. So the first thing, switch the x and the y, start solving for y. Add 2, divide by -1. Rewrite it in exponential or raise both sides to log 2, which gives you this as an end result. Add 3 and replace y with g inverse. Now we're going to sketch the graph. When you sketch the graph, it doesn't matter to me how you do it, but you have the points right here. So make sure those points align up. Okay. Then it's asking, I believe, for the domain and range. Okay. All right, now we're going to look at this exponential function and answer the rest of the questions. All right, so fill in the table below, identifying the domain, the range, and the asymptote. So answer those questions. Okay, so remember f of x is an exponential, so the domain is all real numbers. So the inverse is going to have the range of all real numbers. The range, we need to identify the horizontal asymptote, which looks like it's -3. So that means not only are we going to be bounded by that -3, but what are these other y values? Are they positive or negative? And it looks like we're going up. So that means our range is from -3 to positive infinity, which means our domain is going to be the same thing. Sorry, it was -3 to positive infinity if I misspoke. So the horizontal asymptote, of course, is going to be y equals -3. Therefore, the vertical asymptote is x equals -3. So the question is on 17, are we to the right or left of the inverse? Okay, give a reason. Okay, so on 17, we need to look at the original. The range was from -3 to infinity, which means it was above, which means that the inverse is going to be to the right. And we can also look and confirm that my domain is from -3 to the right. Okay, so there's an adequate explanation. Number 18, find the equation of the inverse. Again, replace x and y, or switch x and y. We're going to add 3, raise each side to the ln, or rewrite as ln. So when you cancel these out, this is what you get. Add 2, replace y with f inverse. Now we're going to sketch. So remember the domain. Remember the domain was -3 to infinity. So your vertical asymptote is going to be at -3. And all you had to do, here's your table of values. You just had to switch them. So make sure those points line up on the graph.